Good morning, viewers. I welcome you all to KP's Litchart's own channel. This is Professor KP Mahapatra. Today we will take up a new topic, the literary tendencies of Victorian Age. Friends, Victorian Age marked a remarkable era in the entire golden annals of English literature because Victorian Age was remarkable in many aspects. First of all, it occurred in the later part of 19th century when science had already made its inroads. There was scientific progress and religious mysticism was withering away. Previously, people used to be orthodox, very conservative. They used to believe in religious dogmas, and those religious dogmas began to be challenged by the scientists. Science believes in experiment, observation, and conclusion. They cannot blindly accept any theory, any dogma. So, that scientific spirit was clearly reflected in Victorian literature as well. Let's discuss what are the chief characteristic features of Victorian Age, which will be very useful for you for your UGC NET exam, postgraduate exam, graduation exam, honors, and even for research in literature. So, as you notice, Victorian age, as I told you, is a remarkable age in different aspects. Literature made a great progress. Literature not only confined itself to poetry, novel emerged as a very vibrant genre. The growth of prose and novel was witnessed during the Victorian age. First of all, we notice in the Victorian age, the note of individuality was perceptible. The poets, the writers, poets like Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, Arthur Hugh Clough, they all highlighted the individual freedom of human beings. They never strayed away from the main principles of individual freedom. For them, individual freedom is uppermost. So they always espoused the cause of human liberty, human freedom, individuality, your own views, your own, principle that was being focused. So they came after the Romantic age or the Romantic poets. The Romantic poets, which you have already discussed, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, and Coleridge. They have been writing poetry, but their thrust was on nature. Wordsworth believed that nature is not only the Norse guide and guardian of my soul, nature is the Norse guide and guardian of all my moral being. In other words, they discovered, or Wordsworth discovered, that there is a keen relationship, there is akinness between humans and nature. The progress in human society would not have been possible had there been no nature. So nature is very bounteous as far as Wordsworth is concerned. The Victorians also believed that nature is important, but at the same time they focused on human issues. They focused on realism. It is said the Romantic poets departed from realism, and they dwelt in an atmosphere of fancy and fantasy, imagination and emotion. But Victorian poets, they believed in emotion and imagination, no doubt, but at the same time, they also focused on the human problems, the socio-cultural problems, the political problems, the other kinds of psychological problems. So, social, political, psychological, religious, problems were reflected in Victorian literature or Victorian poetry, especially by Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, Arthur Hugh Clough. All these people, they highlighted the human issues, the human problems that is afflicting the contemporary society. So in Victorian age, a note of patriotism was also discernible. They were very patriotic and they began to glorify England. They said that England has a glory, has a past heritage, a great legacy, and the legacy, heritage, and glory of the country was also sung in a full-throated voice in Victorian poetry. There we find this was a very great age of prosperity, a time of prosperity, because there was material affluence, there was political consciousness, there were democratic reforms, and there was also industrial progress. So overall you find there is total economic progress and people were living very happily. As we have noticed in the Elizabethan age, during the Elizabethan age, there was stability, political stability, there was material progress, people were living in harmony, there was industrialization, and all those things are there. They are also perceptible during the Victorian age. And as science advanced, there began to be some kind of, there appeared some kind of confusion. People were confused whether they should believe in religious dogmas, they believe in certain beliefs, certain orthodox beliefs, or they will accept science. As a result, for a small period of time, for a brief period of time, there was social unrest, which was very short lived, and that the poets used to overcome. So it was, as I told you, there is note of individuality, and that note of individuality also reflected the note of originality of the writers. Who are the writers? The prose writers and the poets. The poets like Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Arthur Hugh Clough, Matthew Arnold, A.C. Swinburne, and along with them, the prose writers like Macaulay, prose writers like Charles Dickens, prose writers like Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Bronte sisters, and all those people, they began to sing the glory of their country, and they highlighted the socio-cultural issues, the political issues, the economic issues, the poverty, malnutrition, the degradation, moral degradation of the people. All those things were reflected in their poetry. So as a result, we find that Victorian poetry is a brilliant poetry, is a brilliant age which reflected, or which was a blend of romanticism and realism. Because romanticism highlighted emotion and imagination. Romanticism emphasized on dream, fancy, fantasy, phantasmagoria, make-believe world, love of nature, love of sound, the murmuring sound of the fountain. But Victorians, not that they neglected nature, they appreciated nature. They were the votaries of nature. But simultaneously, they were also the lovers of mankind, human beings. They wanted to give some moral note through their poetry. Even the prose writers, like a novelist like Charles Dickens, Thomas Carlyle, Macaulay, all these people, they wanted to give some moral message, some ethical, message to the readers. They highlighted the problems faced by the human beings in the contemporary society, and through the characters, they also portrayed the follies and foibles of human beings. Where the character has flawed and how things are going astray, things are going beyond their control. So all these human problems, social issues, cultural issues, political issues were delineated or portrayed in their novels as well as their poetry. So Victorian literature carried a deep moral note. For a few, years, or for a few for a very small, brief period of time, the pre-Raphaelites, Dante, Gabriel, Rossetti, etc., they were there who championed the cause of art for art's sake. They loved art for the sake of art, but later on it was overcome by the realistic poetry. So Victorian poetry is a blend of realism and fantasy. Emotion and imagination are emphasized. Realism is also emphasized. The issues were highlighted. As a literature, as a result, Victorian literature was an eye-opener. It brought about a kind of consciousness among the readers about their failures, about their flaws, about their mistakes, and so that they can try to rectify them later on. So Victorian literature was a kind of torch bearer for the people living in the Victorian age and for the readers who were very much interested to read the Victorian writers. It was an age of prose and novel. At that time, novel had its wonderful growth. Prose also had its growth. Prose and novel flourished. There was deep moral purpose also in their prose and in their novels also. So there you find that Victorian literature also conveyed a note of pessimism. In the poetry of Matthew Arnold, there is element of melancholy, there is element of pessimism, and in the poetry of A.C. Clough, there is also, melancholy. So all these things are there. Note of melancholy is there, note of pessimism is also there, and there was also the element of skepticism. Why did skepticism arise? Skepticism arose because of the advancement of science. Because science doesn't accept anything on its face value. Science always believes in experiment, observation, and conclusion. So when people started propounding the theories, giving certain concepts, certain dogmas, people did not accept it. They developed some doubt. They developed a sense of questioning. They began to question the authenticity of a particular theory, of a particular concept. As a result, there was the questioning spirit. There was in A.C. Clough and in Arnold also there is element of melancholy, and overall Victorian poetry was acceptable to the readers in England and abroad also across the globe, because there was element of imagination, emotion, fantasy, make-believe world. Along with that, there is the element of realism, sorrows and sufferings, fret and fever, trials and tribulations, enigmas and perplexities, agonies and anguishes, joys and jubilance, thrill and excitement. All those aspects are portrayed in a wonderful manner, in a brilliant manner, not only in the poetry of Victorian age, but also in the novels and prose of Victorian age. As a result, the Victorian literature was appreciated widely across the globe by all categories of readers, irrespective of age group, irrespective of ideologies, irrespective of caste, creed, sex, color, etc. So today we will stop it here. I would like to request you to please share, subscribe and like the video. This is your channel KP's Lit Charts. I will be always with you. This is Professor Kamla Prasad Mahapatra. I will be discussing certain new areas with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.